Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. We are privileged to have Dr. Dawie Roodt online today with us to talk a little bit about the economies and what's going on. There's 3 questions that we would like to discuss with him and get his intake on it. So then straight after Dr. Roodt, we're going to listen to Higu from the Community Care Network that's busy with enterprise development countrywide during lockdown as a support system and after lockdown as a long-term support system. Then we will be chatting to people from around the world. What's the status in their countries and communities during this lockdown and COVID period? And then we're going to get an update from Trend 6 lead analyst on what's happening in the crypto market, the crypto world, especially Bitcoin. And then Hodlknots founder Wendy will talk to us about what's going on in the Hodlknots community. And then we're going to open it up for a general chat. So without further ado, Dawie, thank you so much for jumping in and coming and talk to the community. A lot of people are unsure of what's happening, what's going on, especially economical wise. We know what the news are saying, but it's always nice to hear it out of the experts' mouth. And for those of you who don't know Dr. Dawie Roodt, I think he's one of the most outspoken economists and well-known economists in South Africa on the economical side of things. Yo, Dawie, thank you very much and welcome. We really appreciate the time to spend with us. How's it going on your side?
No, it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. Hello to all of you. Thank you very much for the invite. And you call me Dawie, please. I don't know how many people you have. Can you see me fine? Can you hear me fine? Is the technology working okay?
Perfect.
Yes, 100%. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And I see there are some people online. So good afternoon or good morning. I don't know where you are in the world. To all of you, very nice meeting all of you through this new medium, which I believe is going to be part of our lives in future. All right, can I start off by just maybe just sketching the situation or sketching the world economy or the world political economy worldwide before the crisis, and then go to South Africa? Can I just kick off and go for it?
Dawie, this platform is yours. I'm going to mute myself and you go crazy.
Okay, and tell me just in terms of time, how much, if you let an economist talk forever, they will talk forever. So you have to limit me something.
We've got a training session at 10 o'clock tonight, so if we can just finish before that.
Fine. That's fine. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a short summary on the world before BC, and that's before Corona. So let's give a short summary of BC. The world was, there were certain trends apparent, certain things happening globally before we even heard of a city called Wuhan. Now, a few things, for example, internationally, there was obviously a new kind of nationalism, I call it, and I think Donald Trump is a good example of that, with his protectionism, and of course that leads to things like, for example, a trade war, which we had on and off before BC. And the real irony is that all of a sudden we've got a virus that's doing exactly that and cutting off trade between countries internationally. And I hope the political leaders will realize that what they were hoping for is not such a good idea. It's much better for countries to trade with one another. And that's exactly, in a weird way, what so Corona in a way gave Donald Trump his wish by at least slowing down trade quite significantly between countries. The point is that there was a new kind of nationalism internationally, and in Europe is a good example. Many countries, like, for example, Britain leaving, Brexit is a form of new nationalism. Within Britain itself, Scotland could leave the Union, what's happening in Spain, what's happening in Poland and Hungary. All those are examples of new nationalism. That usually leads to weird things like trade protectionism and all that. Something else that was quite clear internationally is that monetary policy was exceptionally accommodative. That means interest rates were very, very low internationally. Central banks started doing all sort of weird things. They've cut interest rates to 0 or even below 0. And they also started doing things with names like quantitative easing, whereby they print money out of nothing, which will be interesting to the crypto guys. They make money out of nothing because central banks are monopolies. They've got a little machine at the backyard where they can print money. They can do it. We can't do it. Then it's illegal, but for them to do it, that's quite legal. They are statutory monopolies, most instances. And they've created a lot of money out of nothing and started buying government bond instruments, government debt instruments with that. And not only government debt instruments, also some other things that they've been buying, even including corporate paper, and even in some instances, like for example, Japan, they even started buying stock. So I won't be surprised if this continues, and eventually they will start buying. If you throw the kitchen sink at them, they will buy that as well. So that we had exceptionally accommodative monetary policy internationally with interest rates at 0 or below 0, including the longer end of the yield curve. Now, this is very important. It's a bit technical, but essentially, interest rates right across the yield curve, even as far out as 10-year or even longer, where interest rates below 0. That means if you want to lend money to the German government, you had to pay them for the privilege of lending the money. And of course, that leads to all sorts of distortions on the financial markets. Additionally, government or state debt levels, I'm talking BC, were at record high levels, debt levels of hundreds of percent. In the case of Japan, very high, even in countries like, for example, Germany, running state debt of 120% to GDP. And many other countries, the Americans and all of that. So debt levels of states, of governments were very high, and not only that, debt levels of corporates, of companies also were at record high levels. A very important distinction between a crisis now, or difference between a crisis now and what we saw in 2008, is that the banks were not that deep in trouble. The banks were actually worldwide quite well capitalized and quite healthy, the balance sheets of banks internationally. Okay, that was the world before the crisis. The world economic growth was slowing down a bit, but most economists was doing not too bad. And then it was the crisis. Now let me give you just the coronavirus, and let me just give you a quick rundown on what I expect on some of the major economies globally. In the case of the Americans, we had a huge increase in unemployment, or unemployment claims, which is a leading indicator of underlying economic activities. And the American economy is, I'm pretty sure, is in a recession, and we can talk about economic contraction of around about 2% or even worse, 3% or so for the US economy for 2020. The Chinese economy, I'm just going to touch on a few. The Chinese economy, economic growth is going to slow down quite dramatically. The second quarter the first and the second quarter will report negative economic growth in China, but economic growth for 2020, I still expect to be positive in China, but we're talking about a plus 2% or so. For China, that is in a way a recession because they've been growing for many, many years, in some years even as much as more than 10% per year. So 2% for China is pretty much a recession. They were expecting a 5% growth or slightly more for 2020. Now it's going to be around 2%. The European economies are, just about all of them are in a recession. And depending which one you talk about, it can be a very deep recession, like in countries like, for example, Italy, or it can be a relatively mild recession, like, for example, in countries like, I would guess Britain is also one of those. They're also going to go, they're all going through a recession. What I'm concerned about the Europeans is that their biggest economy, and that's Germany, is the economy with the most dry powder that they can use to fight the economic slowdown, but because of political reasons, they're probably not going to use that. So that's the world economy. After the crisis, and more or less, world economy the way I see it now, and more or less what I expect in terms of economic growth. Now back to South Africa. Now, before I get to where we are now, maybe just a bit of a background on where South Africa was before BC. The South African government is probably the most destructive force the South African economy has ever seen. We have seen immense damage caused to the South African economy the past couple of years, especially, and don't think it stopped 2 years ago. It's still going on. they've caused immense damage to just about everything that was touched by the South African government. The state-owned enterprises were run into the ground financially. Eskom is a good example. Eskom's outstanding debt is approximately 500 billion rand. What I don't know where we're going to get the money. South African Airways, that thing is completely bankrupt. Operationally, they have been destroyed as well, as we know with the blackouts that we have in electricity in South Africa. So it's not only finances, but the operational, those companies will run into the ground as well. And it's not only the state-owned enterprises, everything else that is called government or close to government has been hugely mismanaged in South Africa. The local authorities, 3/4 of the local authorities are financially dysfunctional. This is the auditor report, Auditor General's report. The same goes for the provinces, and the same goes for the different departments. In the case of education, as an example, we spend more on education than most countries in the world, but the quality of our education is not only bad, it's sometimes the worst in the world. We are stone last in many instances, especially on things like maths and science and so on. What's also happened, and it happened the last 10 years or so, but I don't think it stopped the past 2 years, it's still going on in fact, is that the state finances have been run into the ground as well. The fiscal deficit was totally unsustainable before Corona. The fiscal deficit was expected to be around about 8% of GDP. The fiscal debt levels were in excess of 65% of GDP. It more than doubled in a matter of 10 years. And the South African economy was in a recession. The last 2 quarters of last year both saw economic contractions. So the South African economy was in a crisis with unemployment levels, depending on your definition, 30% or 40%, and the state finance is completely unsustainable and in a recession. So that's where we were. We were in very, very deep trouble, and we would have seen a downgrade in any event. And it would have taken us many, many years to get out of that hole that we dug ourselves. Then we heard about this horrible thing called the coronavirus, COVID-19. And initially, the financial markets reacted to that as one would have expected. So the first impact on the South African economy was via the financial markets, the rand taking a bit of a knock. The second round impact was when we started getting some real information, and that started happening about 6 weeks or so ago, when we started getting information about what's going on in China in terms of factories closing down and so on. And then the financial market started reacting on the real data, and we saw a bloodbath on the financial markets. We also then heard that the coronavirus is in South Africa, and what we're currently seeing is the impact on our own economy. So those are the 3 phases. We're in the 3rd phase now, which could go on for quite a long time. And of course, the various authorities are implementing various policies, which I will touch on just now. So the South African economy will be very, very hard hit by this virus. I think one of the biggest dangers now is that the reason why we can't do much about it is because of an incompetent and a destructive government previously and still to a large extent. And this is going to be an excuse for the politicians. They're going to say that the economy is going through a recession because of the virus, which is totally bullshit. It is going through a recession because they simply do not have the means to support the economy because of the mismanagement in the past. That's the reason, unlike other countries. So what is going to happen to the South African economy? I've made a few. This is my sort of middle of the road expectations in terms of economic growth. I think economic growth is probably going to be a contraction of about 5% this year. It could be much worse. That's with the assumption of the 3 weeks lockdown. 3% economic contraction. We're probably going to see 1 million people losing their jobs or more. We're probably going to see between 150, maybe as many as 200,000 businesses going out of business. With the state debt levels already unsustainable, state debt is likely to go to something like 70% of GDP in this financial year. The fiscal deficit is probably going to be around about 12% of GDP, the highest ever, the fiscal deficit. So I'm afraid we are in for some extremely difficult times. Now, the Reserve Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, has been managing monetary policy quite conservatively the last couple of years, rightfully so, and that without a doubt is a silver lining. The Reserve Bank came in for a lot of criticism. Economists arguing, some economists even arguing that the Reserve Bank should have cut interest rates a long time ago. Fortunately, they did not. They did start with a cutting cycle recently, before the crisis, before the virus. But fortunately, the Reserve Bank managed monetary policy relatively conservatively. And the result of that is that there is dry ammunition available to the South African Reserve Bank. And they've done things like, for example, cut interest rates to support the financial markets. They've relaxed a number of criteria and measurements on banks to make it easier for banks to lend out and to relax their criteria to their own clients. So the Reserve Bank, and of course the Reserve Bank, this is a bit controversial, we can talk about that. I think the Reserve Bank decided also to enter the capital market, the bond market, and they recently started buying government debt instruments in the capital market. Now that is known as quantitative easing. The Reserve Bank, of course, denies that vehemently. They say this is not quantitative easing, this is only provision of liquidity to the financial markets. But this thing walks like a duck, and it sounds a bit like a duck, but you can talk about that. So the Reserve Bank from their side, I'm not criticizing necessarily, but the Reserve Bank is really going out of the way to support the financial markets and to provide liquidity to the financial markets. And they did that because they can. They have the capacity to do that. In the meantime, the fiscal authorities, that is what the ministers of finance are supposed to be doing, they simply do not have moving space. They've run the state finances into the ground previously, and there just isn't money available to spend on all sort of projects like what we're seeing in many other countries in the world. So we just don't have money available. A few things will announce, a few projects here and there, a billion, 2, 3 here and there, but that's going to be on the margin. It's certainly not going to help much as far in terms of supporting the South African economy. And that's where we are. Now there's talk of the possible further extending the lockdown. If that should happen, I'm afraid the damage to the economy is going to be massive and huge. I just want to make perhaps one or two other comments, and then I'll leave it to questions or to the next question. Quite often people ask me, and economists debate about this all the time, what are we supposed to be doing in terms of policy to get the economies growing? What is good to have? We've got these philosophical questions. What do we want to achieve in life? Do we want to be wealthy? Do we want to be healthy? Do we want to, whatever, economists, and you get different schools of economic thought. I believe that the single most important variable or statistic out there is simply life expectancy of a country. Because everything that I think is good and everything that I think people value and that's important to people correlates very well with life expectancy. For example, you will find that wealthy countries are also countries in which people get quite old. Wealthy countries are also countries with good education and health systems. Wealthy country even are people, you find that people in wealthy countries are mostly happy even. So wealth corresponds very well with just about everything else that is good. Now, the reason why I mention this is because I think we must open this debate and we must ask the question, are we not perhaps overdoing stuff now? Shouldn't we perhaps look at this differently? Shouldn't we rather look at vulnerable groups like elderly people and people with underlying conditions and rather isolate them and get the rest of the economy working again? Because the biggest killer in the world is poverty. And I have no doubt that this lockdown, and if it's extended, will result in more poverty in South Africa. And that is the biggest killer. You won't see it necessarily directly. People are not necessarily going to die of hunger. That's not what I'm saying. But we are going to get poorer. And poverty correlates, unfortunately, with all the bad things in life. Poverty correlates with suicide, with drug misuse, with all sort of violence and crime and stuff. Those are the things that poverty correlates with. So I think we must open this debate. Shouldn't we rather pay the price in terms of more people getting infected or potentially infected and get this economy growing again? Because I have no doubt that poverty will go up. And with that, we will see more people actually getting killed by poverty as well. Okay, there's my sort of introductory comments. Now I'm taking the lead from you again, Dawie.
No, thank you very much, Dawie. That's actually spot on, and I agree 100% with you. It's finding ways of getting the economy going again is, I think, should be the focus of the country and the politician or political leaders out there. Whether that's going to happen, we've got no idea. Um, but anybody and everybody that's got methods and means to keep the economy going, I agree, needs to do whatever they can to continue with that. For example, we've got the South African veterans that has now come together and started the community care network, in essence, to help in the need now, but going on afterwards, and especially focusing on the enterprise development of communities world or countrywide. But yeah, I don't know, I'm going to keep quiet and I'm going to leave the floor open for other people to ask you questions. There's only one question that I would like to ask, and that is the impact on the rand dollar.
Yeah.
Whether we need to keep our dollars or whether we need to start bringing it back. I know what the answer is,
Yeah.
but yeah, it would be nice to hear what your take is on it.
Okay, I'm an asset manager, so we take people's money and we invest it in all sort of things, and we invest it internationally as well. So it's important for me to get a good grip on, or at least a good guesstimate on what the rand dollar exchange rate is going to do. I can tell you the rand is hugely undervalued. We've developed a small model to value the currency, the rand. If anybody wants to ask me about that, I'm happy to share that information. But the rand is hugely undervalued. And under normal circumstances, so however you want to define normal, the rand would have come back quite a lot, and it would have traded at much better levels than where it is currently. Obviously, there are reasons why the rand are so weak. I think you can simply summarize all these reasons into one, and that is a lack of trust in South Africa. But if you want to unpack it, there are things like, for example, inflation that's high in South Africa and America, a very weak economic growth in South Africa, and so on. And now recently we saw Moody's downgrading South Africa as well, which means that South Africa will fall out of very important indices. And if that should happen, then there will be an outflow of capital out of South Africa. So the rand exchange rate is already discounting the possibility of significant further outflows out of South Africa. But I think it's been overdone a little bit. The rand is currently trading. It was trading at 19 even this morning, and it appreciated by, well, a couple of, 50 cents already this morning. And currently, I think even at 1830 odd, where it is currently trading, is a little bit overdone still. So if you put a gun against my head, I will not convert rands into dollars now. I would rather wait a little bit, because I think the rand's going to come back a little bit, maybe to 17 or below 17 even. But it's important not to set a target where you're going to exchange your rands into dollars, but to rather assess the situation every day and then make a call on circumstances and developments on that particular day. But I think the rand's overdone where it is in the short term. On a medium longer term, I have no doubt that is for a weaker currency. Well, the rand's going to go to much lower levels. I just want to say something else. Again, it's a little bit technical. The South African bond market is currently trading at about 10%. So you can get the lowest risk investment in South Africa. You can get a guaranteed 10% return, which is very, very high compared to similar kind of instruments in the rest of the world. And you have a very weak currency. And you have a very well regulated and a very liquid financial market in South Africa. So for a foreigner, if you want to take a quick bite out of the cherry, this is a wonderful opportunity, because your entrance, the currency, is very cheap. Your yields are very attractive, the yields of 10%, and your market is very liquid. So don't be surprised if the foreigners suddenly wake up one day and say, listen, I want to make a couple of bucks quickly in South Africa and then run away again, that the rand suddenly is going to appreciate because of the speculators coming in for a quick bite and then run out again. So just keep that scenario in the back of your mind, because that is quite possible as well. But if you, as an asset manager, I advise my clients to make sure that a substantial portion of the assets are invested abroad. And I'm not a speculator, but I have to keep an eye open for the speculators as well. But I won't be surprised if the rand comes back strongly, literally within days. But I'm convinced it's not going to stay strong for long.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dawie. Yeah, if you've got a question, just raise your hand. There's a function and we can go down the list. Otherwise, we could turn out. And while Hugo is going to ask his question, you're welcome to. Oh, how do you raise your hand? We just figure it out myself. At the bottom, there is. Who's the clever ones here? I know. Oh, no, that's clapping hands.
Yeah, you open your participants and then right-hand bottom corner.
Did everybody get that? Hugo figured it out. So you
I had to Google it.
All right, Eugene figured it out. Hugo, you can go.
Dawie, thank you for this very insightful briefing. Question to you, as we know, officially the country is under lockdown, but in reality, it's only a partial lockdown because the poorer people aren't in lockdown. The townships are basically doing more or less what they are doing. The question to you is, how do we get the township economies going? Because surely there's the most poverty, surely there are the huge masses of unemployed people. What can we do as country and as individuals to get the township economies going?
Yeah, we can talk all day about this. I've got a few ideas. Well, first of all, we should have been in a position where we can spend 300 or 400 billion rand today to support the South African economy, like what many other countries are doing. That we can't do that because of the reasons that I've mentioned. So we don't have money. That is unfortunate. If we had money, we could have done something. We don't have money because of previous mismanagement. There are a few things that I suggest we do if you want to support the township economies. Okay, let me just make this comment. If you want to grow an economy over time, you have to get your basics right. And the most important single thing that you have to get right is you have to make sure that you have world-class primary education. That is building block number one. Unfortunately, it takes decades, literally, at least 2 decades before you start seeing the benefits of that. But getting primary education right is the single most important thing. And like I've mentioned, despite the huge amounts of money, our primary education in South Africa is absolutely horrible. So what we have to do with the eye on the longer term future is that we've got to fix primary education. In fact, I would declare it some sort of emergency. I will introduce Saturday schools and afternoon schools and all sort of things in order to get primary education right. We have to improve the quality of primary education. That is just a general comment, the first building block for any country. And then coming back to things like, for example, the townships. What can be done in the townships? Obviously, we have to get the townships going, and we have to get businesses going in the townships as quickly as possible. The lockdown is simply impractical in the townships. It's not possible to expect 6 people living in a shack to stay in that shack, to lock down in that shack, for example. So it's just not going to happen. So I think the townships are going to be very, very hard hit. And I think you have to relax the lockdown on the townships, and you must allow them some way or the other to start doing business in one way or the other. And then what I also believe that can be done, this is something that's relatively easy to do. You must give people property rights in the townships, especially on land. You don't need to develop the land. You don't need to go and put in toilets and electricity necessarily, but you must give them the actual property right over the piece of land that they are living on in the townships, or even pieces of land that belongs to the local authorities. Give that out to poor people and give them the right to sell that if they want it. These RDP houses, for example, it doesn't belong to the individuals because they are limited. They are not allowed to sell that. So those are some of the mistakes that we are making. So if you want to fix the townships, I believe the easiest thing to do is simply give people property rights in the townships. And then I've got another suggestion. And people, I know, but think a little bit about this, and I think there could be some merit in this as well. I did mention a couple of times that we have a hugely destructive government. They're doing so much damage to this economy. I get angry. Sometimes I lose hope if I look at the way that they waste money and the wrong decisions they're taking. But there are many reasons why people are poor. And one reason why people are poor is simply because they don't have a good feeling about an economy. They don't feel positive about their place where they live. And what we need and what we urgently need is some sort of success story in South Africa. Now personally, I went through a difficult time when I was a young guy. And and what I realized is that the one way of feeling better about myself is to be successful in something. And something that worked for me was to read books. So I started reading books. And it's good to read a book, because if you start a project, read a book, and you complete the project, finishing the book, you feel good about yourself. And that's what we need. We need a project that can actually work in South Africa. Nothing works properly. And this is my suggestion. And maybe this lockdown could be the beginning of this. Why don't we get, and unfortunately we've got a bit of a funny guy being the Minister of Transport, but why don't we start a project whereby we decide that we are going to fix traffic in South Africa? We're going to get everybody to stick to the rules, and we're going to start implementing the draconian law enforcement, and make sure that people stick to within the rules in traffic, because we kill a lot of people on the roads. So, and I believe that you will get the support of the community, of everybody in South Africa. So fix the traffic. That's something everybody will support you in doing that. It can be done. And I get so angry in the morning when taxis pass on the wrong side and do all sort of stupid. I will feel better if I get home as I see people simply, if I get to work, people are just following the rules. So that's one suggestion, fix the traffic. Here's another suggestion. Clean the place up. Just clean the place up. And it's not going to be that difficult. Rwanda is a very good example. I think once a week what they do, they literally walk in the street, the president himself, and they pick up stuff and clean the place up. Do that. Clean the townships up. It looks horrible. Not only the townships. I've been all over in South Africa, and big cities. Port Elizabeth is a dump. East London is a dump. Uppington, those places look horrible. It's dirty. Clean the bloody place up, and people will start feeling better about it. So there are some practical solutions and suggestions that I think we can do. And of course, there are many other things that we need to do as well. You have to get, I think, for example, training colleges, we have to bring them back, like the teacher training colleges and medical training colleges for nurses and sisters, and that sort of stuff. All those other things we can do that. We need to fix the tax system, and we need to fix infrastructure. But I think important place to start is to get people to be proud of where you're staying. And nobody can be proud if you stay in a dump where things are so dirty. So there are some suggestions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dawie. All right, Eugene, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Dewald. Thanks a lot for the session. Dawie, thanks for your comments. And yeah, it's very insightful, and I find it very interesting. I unfortunately missed the first few minutes, when you were covering global economy. I'm very much a big picture kind of person. And I've been a student of the global economy for the last couple of years, which I find extremely interesting. Now, my question is, what I would like to sort of get your feeling on is, what is the end game here? Because I can only see, with a massive amount of monetary stimulus that is debt-backed, pumped into economies of first world countries, I can only see a path of perhaps deflation now for the next while, and then hyperinflation setting in at some point in the future when people realize that currency is worth nothing, because of the fact that it's simply unlimited and it grows on trees, especially for the US Fed. So my question is, what is the end game that you see? I know none of us can see into the future, but I'd like to hear your take on it. And my feeling is also that the current, the financial system that we've been living in for the last number of decades really doesn't reward the saver. It rewards the borrower, and it rewards the major financial institutions that gather more and more wealth without taking on any risk and just gets bailed out. So to my mind, a strong free market economy needs savers. It needs those people, those institutions that's able to step in and help out and get rewarded handsomely because they were prudent in the good times to store away. So yeah, that's just my take, and I would like to hear if you had any comments on that, any comments on the monetary system, and to what extent people might wake up now and realize that hard money like gold, silver, Bitcoin, where there's a limited supply, and where productivity is actually required to produce that money. at what point that might be something that the penny drops for the average person on the street. So yeah, it's a bit of a multi-tier question.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, a couple of things that you're touching on there. Very interesting questions, by the way. Let me just make a couple of random comments here, and some of the shots might hit the target. One thing that I think is important to understand is that one of the reasons why certain economies grow, apart from things like education and so on, but the very important fundamental reason why an economy grows is simply because people are investing. And people are investing if you postpone consumption. We must understand this. Investments is nothing but postponed consumption. So if you consume everything today, then you won't have anything to invest, and you're not going to grow your economy in future. So you must postpone consumption, and that's why people find it so difficult to save, because it's fun to consume. It's not necessarily fun to postpone consumption. When interest rates are very low, and you're right, then theoretically what's supposed to happen, people will not save, and you will have less savings and less investments and less economic growth as well going forward. So that's just a comment I want to make. Another comment that I think is worthwhile to understand is monetary policy. And to understand monetary policy, you have to understand money. Money consists of a number of things and a number of levels, and it works in various ways and so on. But two things are important to understand about money. You get basically two kinds of money, but I guess if you talk about cryptos, you get private money and public money, but I mean, the normal money system that we have consists of two levels. And that is that you get what we call high-powered money or base money. That is where central banks create money out of nothing, and they give it to the banks, as an example, in exchange for a piece of paper called a government bond instrument. So the banks sit with this money in their hands, and that's the first phase in money creation. The second phase in money creation is when the banks lend this money out and people borrow this money. And that is actually where a lot of money is being created. It's very important to have base money, because without base money, you cannot have the credit process taking hold and making base money more. I'm sure you all understand the money creation process. But the money creation process depends on people borrowing and banks lending. Of course, the banks must have the money to start off with, but that process is a process, the money creation process. And if people don't borrow or banks do not lend, then central banks can create as much base money as they wish. People still are not going to borrow, and banks are still not going to lend for various reasons. Currently, that is exactly what is happening in South Africa. People are not borrowing, and banks are not lending because we're all shit scared. We just don't want to borrow money unless you want to survive. Maybe people are borrowing simply to try to survive. But that is the dilemma of central banks. It's like pulling on a string. You can pull on a string, you can get people to stop people borrowing by increasing interest rates, but you cannot get people to borrow more money by lowering interest rates. Of course, under normal circumstances, people will start borrowing money, but when they're scared, like where we are today, or after the 2008 crisis, for instance, people simply stop borrowing money. So M1 or M0 may go up, but M2 and M3 and the further ones may not necessarily go up, because that depends on the credit cycle. And that depends on whether people want to borrow money. So that's an important point to make as well. But come back to your question. So what is happening at the moment? Central banks are buying everything. They're buying government bond instruments. And by the way, there's not really much of a difference between a central bank creating money and printing dollars or yens or euros, or the treasury of a country printing government bond instruments. It's basically, in a way, the same thing. There's this story doing the rounds that central banks are independent. That's bullshit. Central banks are not independent. They're all part of the same system. They're all part of what we call a government or a country or whatever. But that's a bit of a philosophical debate. The point I'm trying to make is that central banks are creating a lot of yens today, or dollars. They're using these yens to buy a lot of government debt instruments. They're using these yens to buy corporate paper and even stocks in some instances. And eventually, if there's another crisis, then they will start using these newly created money to buy other stuff. And you're absolutely right. The day will come when people's going to say, listen, but they've converted everything into money now. There's so much money lying around. I don't want much of this money anymore. And that then eventually will lead to inflation. So I agree with you. I agree with you that eventually the world is going to wake up one day and we're going to have total runaway inflation, like we had in the early 1970s, or even much worse. Can I just, there are certain steps or a certain pattern That is typical. And we are following that pattern absolutely brilliantly. Look at what happened in Venezuela. First of all, you get a government that is a destructive government that wants to take your money, wants to take your wealth. And they do that by way of taxes. And they keep on doing that until they run out of taxpayers. And we ran out of taxpayers in South Africa some time ago. The second thing what they do, they start using the capital available to them. And typically what happened in South Africa, they misuse the capital that was locked into Eskom, South African Airways, so they consumed that capital. Of the capital over which they had control until you run out of capital, and then you have to look for the next pot of gold, and the only remaining pot of gold are the savers, the pension funds. And recently I'm sure all of you know about all this talk in South Africa about making use of various pension funds to bail out the state-owned enterprises and all sort of things. And in fact, CASA recently said they wanted to use the savings of the government employees to bail out Edcon, a private sector company. Edgars belongs to them, by the way. And then, so that is the third step. Eventually you run out of the savings in your economy as well. And then the next step is always the same, and that is if there's no more money that you can steal from somebody else, but you still have a lot of debt and you want to get rid of your debt, then you have to take over your central bank and simply start printing money. And that's exactly what Venezuela did. That is exactly what Zimbabwe did. And not too long ago, Ace Magashule of the African Nationalist Congress, the ANC, did say that, and in fact, this is official, this is what the ANC stands for. They want to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank, and Ace Magashule wants the South African Reserve Bank to literally start printing money. He calls it quality easing. He hasn't got a clue what to name it even. It's got another name, and quite ironically, that's exactly what the Reserve Bank is doing today. So my answer to you is that yes, eventually we're going to see inflation, but we're going to see inflation internationally only when people will be prepared to start borrowing money and the banks start lending money out, and that becomes an avalanche, and that process starts feeding on itself. Only then will you see inflation. In the case of South Africa, that's probably going to be sooner because of other reasons. We don't have a so-called hard currency like the US or the Europeans and so on. So we're probably going to see much higher inflation sooner. It's not going to happen this year because people are so damn scared. They're not prepared to buy anything except baked beans and perhaps a bottle of brandy to get it somewhere. But they're not buying anything else. And they're sitting on their hands, sitting at home, not buying anything. But the moment people start spending money, then inflationary pressures in the economy will pick up as well. And then, of course, the whole process can start. So I'm afraid that in 2 years or 3 years' time, inflation could become a big problem in South Africa. But it's probably a little way off before we see that happening in the rest of the world.
No. Brilliant. Thank you, Dawie. I know Avi said that you have another meeting at 3 o'clock, so I hope I get the chance of my last question in. Carl, you can unmute yourself and throw your question. And Dawie, please, if you need to go, just give me a minute's heads up.
All right, Dewald, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Carl.
Okay. Dawie, Dewald, hi, Carl LaRue here. I asked a similar question to David Shapiro a couple of years ago, that you're talking a first world language. And I'm sure that 125 people on this webinar immediately understand what you're saying, and we are prepared to follow your lead in what you suggest, but we're not in a first world. That's just a loose remark. We can't change that. My worry is it worthwhile maintaining any level of ownership on property in this country for the long future? I don't see it. I have become significantly negative. That's my question. I'm not going to elaborate. Thanks for your time.
Okay, yes. Yeah, okay, let me just that's a very interesting, we can talk about that question, but let me, the way I see this. If you analyze an economy, we'll see economies go through different phases. Economies go through, initially we were hunter-gatherers and we will walk around in a bush and you kill a rabbit and you will eat a rabbit straight away, because if you don't, then somebody else is going to eat a rabbit, and they may even eat you as well. That is the life of a hunter-gatherer. Life expectancy was short, about 25 years. Life was brutal. It wasn't nice. And a thing that we call the economy only started with the primary and the secondary industries, and that was with agriculture and with mining. That's where economies always start. And what made life, what we call the economy different from a simple, pure existence in the bush somewhere as a hunter-gatherer, the difference is private property rights. Because in economics, there is only one free lunch. Only one free lunch. You all understand, you know this expression of free lunch. But there is a free lunch, and there's only one free lunch, and that is trade. Two people that exchange things between one another both gain from that transaction, because if they both did not gain, they would not have transacted. So that is a free lunch. Before the transaction, there's two people with somebody with money and somebody with a good. But after the transaction, you still have the good and money. But
Dawie, we lost you there.
my apologies, sorry about that. So, okay, that's a free lunch. And so economies evolved over time, and it's interesting to see how economies evolved over time. But every time what happened is that trade become more and more important. You produce stuff in the primary industries, and eventually in the secondary industries, and eventually we move into the tertiary industries, especially in the service industry. So economies evolved over time. But the interesting thing is every time there's a new evolution in the way that we run economies, trade becomes more and more important, and very importantly, the thing that makes trade easy, namely money, evolved with that over time as well. And today we live in the modern economies, and in the modern economies, if you look at the rich world, like the Americans and Europeans, most economic activities take place in the tertiary industry. And the tertiary industry is primarily what we are doing now. The tertiary industry are things in various services that we conduct, like, for example, asset management or lecturing or talking to one another or reading on the internet. That's all part of the service industry. And I also believe that the world economy is probably much bigger than what we think, because we simply underreport what is happening in the modern economy. We cannot report on that, because let me give you one example. There was a study done in America, and the conclusion is that people are prepared to pay $500 a year to have access to Google. Google is free today, but the value of Google is at least $500 per person in America. But it's nowhere captured in any economic statistics anyway. So I've got a suspicion that this thing that we call the modern economy, the gig economy, is much bigger than what we think. But another thing that is very interesting, as economies evolve over time, they're becoming not only more service orientated, but they're becoming more digitized as well. And an excellent example is what my daughter is doing. My daughter is a geneticist. I'm very proud of her. She just completed a year ago a PhD in genetics. And my daughter, if you compare a geneticist with somebody 10,000 years ago, what is the occupation closest to a geneticist 10,000 years ago? And that person is probably a farmer. That's the closest you can get to a geneticist. And a farmer will selectively breed certain plants or animals or whatever. He will know and understand plants and animals 10,000 years ago. Today, a geneticist will sit in a lab somewhere and analyze a genome and email that genome to somebody else somewhere else in the world. So geneticists today actually digitize life. Think about that. And the real value add doesn't happen really on the land. It happens in a lab somewhere. So I think to try to answer your question is that the world is becoming much less physical and much more digitized and service oriented. And in fact, we are today talking over this specific medium, and I'm doing my work on a similar kind of things, and I've never been this busy in my life. So the point is that politicians think land is important. Politicians think that they need to nationalize land, and that's nonsense, because that's not where the value add is really taking place. The value add is taking place somewhere else. So I think that's the important point that we all have to understand. And I just maybe interrupt myself in saying that we're also seeing now with this virus is that the fourth industrial revolution has actually been forced upon us, which is a good thing, by the way. So I think what we need to do is to understand where wealth creation is actually taking place, what the skills is that you need in order to participate in that, and what are the other requirements. And the requirements are simply, you have to be safe somewhere, look after yourself and after your family. You have to have access to medical facilities, and not even that much nowadays, because much of that can be doing You don't even need access to a good school because you can get all this done on the internet in any event. But you must have the skills and you must have a connection. That is what matters. So, and from that point of view, I don't really care much what's going to happen to South Africa. I think it doesn't look good, the future. As long as I'm safe and as long as I've got a connection, I'm happy. Because I can still continue with my work and can do my stuff and so on. Now, maybe on a side comment, and this is an asset manager speaking, and that is I don't like physical property. For various reasons. The transaction costs are very high, the liquidity is very low, the geysers break, it's difficult to collect the rent and those sort of reasons. If you want to invest in property, rather invest in listed property, transaction costs much lower, liquidity much higher and so on. So I don't like, but you know, who am I to say that somebody shouldn't have a beach house? Some people got beach homes because they take the most beautiful pictures of the kids there. I mean, that's a good reason. That's why we live. We want to live to enjoy stuff. But some people buy fancy cars. That's what they like. I've got my own hobby, and I can show you behind me. That's what I have. That's a fish tank. And if my wife knows what I pay for fish, put into that fish tank, she's going to divorce me. So that's what I do. Also crazy. What I do. So life is not only about money. Life is about enjoying life as well, I guess.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Dawie. Gert, I know you like to elaborate on your questions. Just allow me some time left with Dawie to ask my question, but go for it, Gert.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Gert.
Thank you, Dawie. This is an incredible, insightful talk that you're having with us, and thank you for spending the time to be with us. I didn't have the first part of the webinar. For some odd reason, I got on late. So if my question has already been answered in some way or the other, then that's fine. I take it that there will be this webinar is being recorded or not?
Yes, Gert, and we will make it available at one Bitcoin.
Thank you. So, Dawie, my question is about the connecting to the poverty in our country. If my statistics are correct, that we are more than 52% of the people in the country are in poverty, i.e. living on less than $2 a day, and actually getting worse. And one of the things of poverty alleviation, amongst other, is to ensure that the job market has the ability to supply employment. And in the 2018 summit, Ramaphosa, with the work summit that he had with the various private sector people, made a declaration stating that by 2030, maybe it will be 3030 if we're lucky, but by 2030, the intention is to bring the current employment down from a 27% to a 6%. That is the goal, and he actually thought that that was an achievable goal. My question is, given where we are and given what you are now saying, what needs to be done to actually get this job market going? Number one. Number two is also with regards to the young people, which actually it's really like a ticking time bomb, because you spoke about the education, getting people in education. You can just go on Google and just look at all the sites where people are applying for jobs, and the real tragic stories that is coming out, and the struggle for finding jobs. And it's as though, even though they have qualifications, they simply cannot find a job. And it's, I mean, some of the guys just don't even want to get up in the morning. They are desperate. They have no thing that they are thinking about that's giving them any sense of living.
Yes. Okay, I'm not going to answer your whole question, but I'm going to try to sort of touch on the important part here. Where are you physically?
Me, I am in Pretoria.
Okay, and you work, I guess, in Pretoria somewhere in Johannesburg?
No, I am retired.
Oh, you're retired. The point I want to make, if you go to work, you will probably would have taken a car. Now, what I suggest we do is that we ban cars. Because if we ban all cars, then you force people to take horses, then you're going to employ a lot of people, because we need a lot of people to look after horses, a lot of grow, you have to dedicate a lot of farmland to grow horse food, and a lot of people doing all sort of funny things with horses. In fact, that's a huge industry. A quarter of, before the motor car, 25% of the total production in agriculture in the US was used to feed horses. The point I want to make, if we want to employ, if job creation is our aim, it's very easy to create jobs. Just simply ban cars. I'm trying to be funny here. Or you can get 1,000 people to dig 1,000 holes and another 1,000 to fill it up again. That is wrong. It is wrong to try to create jobs. That is one of those big typical policy mistakes that politicians are making trying to create jobs. Please do not create jobs. Every time there's a new invention, every time there's a new something that we discover, if it's a vacuum cleaner or a car, the intention is to destroy jobs. We do not want jobs. Nobody wants a job. Everybody wants wealth. And that's it. And I think that's where the emphasis should be. Put measures in place that assure that we can create wealth in the process. And quite incidentally, by accident, jobs will be created in the process as well. But do not put the emphasis on jobs, and do not put the emphasis, and do not set policies to create jobs. That is the wrong thing to do. Do whatever you can, but to create wealth only. So, and I can give you some other examples as well on the job issue, but I think we're running out of time. But I think the emphasis must be on wealth creation, and please not on job creation. The moment a politician tells you he's going to create jobs, you must know it's going to destroy something in the economy.
Yeah, Dawie, I actually agree with you on that note, and it's the same thing with I wish they will ban the word give in poverty and in NGOs and stuff like that, to stop giving and rather start enabling. That will change our world. The word give, as just with the word job creation, created a begging spirit and created a begging culture in our world. So if we can get rid of those two words, it will be fantastic. Now, the last question, I know you're running out of time, or if I understood correctly. If you are allowed, what is your take on cryptocurrency as a alternative economic system?
Okay, let me just quickly, I want to answer that with and I really need to go with a political answer. Remember, a country doesn't exist. A company does not exist. It's simply an agreement between individuals. And we've got a place called South Africa, and it consists of 60 million people, whatever, and we all agree this is a country, but we can just all agree what we don't want this country anymore, and we're going to break it up into smaller pieces. So, and I think that's the future of South Africa. South Africa will consist of a number of smaller units, and I think this virus maybe even accelerate this the whole thing, the break up of South Africa politically as well. It started happening already in South Africa, and I think communities will play a much more important role in future, and that will make it much easier for people for this thing called cryptocurrencies to take hold. So I'm positive from that angle. A second angle has to do with the previous question that we had about global inflation, high levels of inflation. That's another reason why I believe that the cryptocurrency certainly also will have a future. And another reason is that you have to understand that politicians are becoming more and more, interfering in our lives more and more, and they need money to do all this stuff. They need more money. And politicians are going to tax us more and more over time. You haven't seen nothing yet. After this crisis, are the politicians going to try to get more money out of our pockets? And that's another reason, because of the anonymity of cryptocurrencies, why I'm quite bullish on cryptocurrencies. But as always, be careful and make sure you understand this. Don't invest in cryptocurrencies, but make sure you understand the technology.
No, thank you very much for your time, Dawie. Really appreciate it.